They laughed when I was broke. Today they're on their knees. People think being poor is about having an empty wallet. It's not. It's about having an empty voice. When you speak, no one listens. When you dream, no one believes you. And when you fail, everyone remembers. James grew up learning this early. Not because someone explained it to him, but because life showed him. Every day, in small ways, it reminded him where they thought he belonged. They never shouted at James. They never insulted him directly. They said things that sounded helpful. Be realistic. Know your limits. People like us don't make it. They wrapped doubt in advice, and that was worse. Because when someone insults you, you can fight back. But when they pretend they care, you start questioning yourself. Slowly, James began to believe the limits they placed on him. James wore the same clothes until they faded. He worked jobs that barely paid enough to survive. Every morning, he put on a smile that didn't belong to him. At work, they talked about vacations. At lunch, they talked about investments. James talked about nothing. Silence was safer. Silence was cheaper than explaining a life no one wanted to understand. At night, everything changed. The smiles disappeared and the pretending stopped. There was no audience and no pressure to perform. There was only James, alone with his thoughts. He replayed every laugh he heard during the day. Every look that made him feel small. Every moment he felt invisible, even in crowded rooms. Lying awake in the dark, one question kept returning. Is this all I will ever be? For a long time, he had no answer. The turning point didn't come with drama. There was no rock bottom and no speech that saved him. It came through exhaustion. One night, James realized he was tired of explaining himself to people who never cared. Tired of defending dreams they had already buried. Tired of shrinking his hopes just to fit in. That quiet exhaustion settled deep inside him. And without telling anyone, he made a decision that slowly changed his life. James made a promise to himself in silence. He decided to stop talking about his plans and start becoming them. No announcements. No validation. No need for approval. If he failed, only he would know. If he succeeded, he wouldn't explain. The results would speak. It wasn't confidence that pushed him forward. It was relief. Relief from needing permission to try, and freedom from being understood. While others rested, James learned. While others laughed, he practiced. There was nothing glamorous about his routine. No applause and no encouragement. Just quiet repetition. He failed more times than he could count, but he failed without noise. He improved slowly, often without noticing. Weeks passed with no visible change. Months felt pointless. But he kept going, because discipline doesn't need witnesses to work. James locked himself in a world that had no physical form. He was building complex networks of cybersecurity and encryption. This was work where a single wrong line of code could destroy months of effort. He wasn't just building software. He was constructing a digital fortress. A fortress so strong that even the world's most elite hackers could not breach it. His fingers danced across the keyboard. His mind found refuge in mathematical formulas that were far beyond the reach of ordinary understanding. James lost money along the way. He trusted the wrong people and made decisions that hurt him deeply. Some nights, he stood one step away from quitting everything. But failure no longer scared him. Because when you've been poor, truly poor, you learn something powerful. You already know how to survive. And once survival is familiar, failure loses its power over you. Months bled into each other. James's connection to the outside world vanished. His old friends had forgotten him entirely. The rising and setting of the sun no longer held any meaning. His universe was now confined to data, logic, and algorithms. When his brain could take no more, he would sleep right there on the floor. But even in his dreams, the same numbers and graphs continued to scroll. It was a silent madness that would break a normal man. But for James, this madness was his forge. Then small wins appeared. Nothing dramatic. Nothing impressive. Just signs that things were moving forward. Enough to breathe easier. Enough to stand straighter. Enough to continue. James didn't celebrate. He didn't post or explain. He protected his momentum quietly, like something fragile. He understood that progress grows best when it isn't constantly exposed to doubt and outside opinions. One night, while the entire city slept, James achieved the impossible. He had developed a master code. A system that could neutralize any digital threat on a global scale. In that moment, he didn't celebrate. He didn't make a sound. He simply leaned back in his chair and took a deep, heavy breath. He knew his life would never be the same. He was no longer the poor James whom people ignored. He had become a force that the entire world was about to need. People didn't notice James while he was trying. They noticed him when results showed. The laughter softened. Jokes turned into curiosity. Questions replaced assumptions. How are you doing that? Is it really working? James answered politely, but briefly. Not out of pride. Not for attention. He knew they were seeing outcomes, not the years of silence and struggle behind them. The world finally learned his name when a global banking crisis was averted by his security system. News headlines began to speak of an anonymous genius who had saved the digital economy. James was no longer invisible. He was now the owner of a multi-million-dollar corporation that managed the most secure servers on the planet. The people who once saw him in faded clothes now watched him on financial news in disbelief. He named his empire Silent Protect because it represented the years he spent building in the dark. Success didn't make James louder. It made him selective. He learned that real power isn't proving people wrong. It's never needing their approval again. He chose his words carefully. He chose his time carefully. Most importantly, he chose his people carefully. His circle grew smaller. His boundaries grew stronger. Not from arrogance, but from clarity about what deserved access to his energy. James now held the kind of power that could shift markets with a single decision. The world's biggest investors waited for weeks just to get a 10-minute meeting in his office. But James chose to keep his headquarters far away from the city lights. He preferred the quiet. He had proven that true success is not about making noise. It is about making yourself so essential that the world cannot function without your contribution. One day, they came back. Not to apologize. Not to admit mistakes. They came to ask. For help. For access. For opportunity. The same people who once laughed now spoke carefully. James listened without reacting. He noticed the change immediately. The respect hadn't come from kindness. It came from position. And in that moment, he understood how the world truly works. James felt no anger. No excitement. Only clarity. Because power gives you something revenge never can. Choice. He owed no explanations. He owed no second chances. And for the first time, that freedom felt real. Not loud. Not emotional. Just solid. He realized that becoming strong enough to choose was the real reward, not the success itself. Among those who returned was the man who had once told James to be realistic. His own company was now facing bankruptcy and he desperately needed the security software that only James could provide. The man who used to ignore James at lunch now stood in his lobby with a trembling voice. He wasn't looking for a business deal anymore. He was looking for a miracle. James watched him through the glass and realized that the man did not even recognize the person he had once mocked. James did not insult him or bring up the past. He simply looked at the file and handed it back. He explained that his company only partnered with those who respected the process of hard work. James did not give him a loan, Instead he gave him the same advice he had once used to save himself. He told him to go back to the beginning and rebuild with honesty. True power was not about destroying his enemies. It was having the freedom to walk away without needing their validation. If you're being mocked right now, hear this clearly. They aren't laughing because you're incapable. They're laughing because they can't imagine who you're becoming. Most people judge only what they see today. Stay quiet. Stay disciplined. Keep showing up when no one is watching. Growth doesn't need permission, and it doesn't need applause to be real. People don't respect beginnings. They respect endings. They don't applaud effort. They respond to results. One day, if you stay consistent long enough, the laughter will stop. Doubt will disappear. Questions will begin. And that's when you'll know. James didn't just survive what tried to break him. He rose. Calmly. Quietly. Completely.